Hello, everyone. We'll get started just a second. Today, we're going to be focusing on hip flexors and glutes. But we're going to start with what we've done in the past couple of weeks, warming up the feet, warming up the calves, hamstrings. Then we'll move on to quads and hip flexors and glutes. So let's get started just with the feet. If you have foot roller, tennis ball, you can start by massaging your feet one foot at a time. Remembering that there's 3 points of the feet. There's the inside arch, there's the middle of the foot, and there's sort of the outside arch. We want to focus on that middle arch to start with. Middle area of the foot, or sorry, inside. Remember, you can also mobilize the bones by wiggling your toes. And if you have a foot roller, you can go ahead and use that. Your foot. Focusing on the inside arch. The inside arch is what gets really tight when we jump a lot. Or do point work too. But I notice, especially jumping, that the insides of the feet tend to get really tight. And if you have a tennis ball, you can go ahead and roll side to side, or you can roll back and forth. If you don't have either of those, you can keep massaging with your hands. And when you've done that, just go ahead and give your arch and foot a little stretch. Switch between stretching out the ball of the foot, metatarsal, and your ankle. Just get a little bit of mobility in there. And then when you're ready, let's go ahead and work on the other side. Start by massaging your foot. And remember, on your own time, if you have massage oil, you can push from the ball of the foot all the way up and it won't stick. So it's sort of this area right here using both thumbs, pushing up. And if you don't, you can just sort of mobilize the foot, poke at it, poke at the arch. Whatever feels good. Wiggle your bones around, mobilize in between your toe joints. And if you have a foot roller, go ahead and roll out your feet, your other foot. And when you're ready, you can switch to the tennis ball. If you have one, roll back and forth, inside and outside. Or you can go back and forth on your foot. Or you can keep massaging your foot. And then go ahead and stretch out your toes and your arch. Sometimes your ankles or toes may crack while you're doing this. All right, let's go ahead and sit down again. Before we move on to the calves, I want you guys to test your range in a few stretches. We're going to be focusing on the hips today, so I'm going to have you test more hip stretches than usual. But let's do some hamstring as well. Test your range stretching forward. See how that feels. Notice what feels tight and what doesn't. Maybe the inside feels tight today, maybe the outside feels tight. Same thing with one leg. Test your other leg, each to the side. Test your straddle, both legs. And notice especially like how wide your hips can go and how far forward you can go, and whether you feel a pulling more behind the knee or in closer towards your hips, because we're going to be working on both those areas today. And then go ahead and test your pigeon stretch. And I want you guys to test it turned in. You can push off the ball of your foot if you like. And also test your range turned out like you would for an arabesque or for a soda shop with the back leg, because we're going to be doing a little bit of work that can change the range here. And make sure you test both sides, both turned in and turned out. And if you like, you can also test your splits with the back leg turned in and turned out and see if there's a difference. Because for some people, you might have better range when you're turned out and your range gets worse when you're turned in, or vice versa. That all depends on whether it's your outer hip flexor that is tight or the inside where the gracilis attaches to the pubic bone that is tight. So it really just depends on your body type and how you're built. So let's also test today butterfly stretch and see how that feels. And glute stretch, either fire log position or full crossed stretch, whichever one you normally do. Don't spend a ton of time stretching right now, but just see how it feels. See where your body's at. And then finally, test your lunge with both the leg up and the knee down. This is more of a pure hip flexor stretch. This also gets into your quads. So it's good to test both. And make sure you test both sides just to see where your range is at. And then I want you guys to try something also. Turn in towards your leg that is up. And you should feel a stretch in your glutes here. And sometimes you'll feel a stretch along the side of your hip, on the side that's down. And test that on both sides. And see how that feels. Okay. Now let's continue with our abs. So keep that sort of mental image in your mind of how your body feels in all those stretches, what hurts, what feels good, what feels tight, what feels stiff, what feels loose. And let's start by massaging the inner line of the calf. So once again, as a reminder, we have our inner line, our middle line, and the outer line of the calf. So we'll start with the inner line. If you have a massage stick, go ahead and use that. If you don't, you can use your hands and just knead at your calf. If you have massage oil, you can put some on the palm of your hand and work it upwards this way. Remember that everything is connected. So if your calves are tight, it could be pulling on your hamstrings, which could in turn be pulling on your hips. So sometimes it's not just that your hips are tight or your hamstring is tight. Sometimes it's that all these other little muscles of different parts of your body are tight and they have an effect in a different area of your body. And let's go ahead and move to the middle line of the calf, right behind the calf. And again, if you don't have a massage stick, just using your hands works great. And when you're ready, move to the outside of your calf. Remember, this is the area that gets tight whenever we're doing something with a shaped foot where it's a little bit winged or even wrapped. This can get super tight, so it's really important to keep that nice and loose. And when you're ready, let's go ahead and switch to the other leg, starting with the inner line. And when you're ready, moving to the middle line. And when you're ready, moving to the outer line. And remember, another option you have if you don't have a stick is you can always roll with the foam roller directly, knee facing the ceiling, turning your leg in to get the inside line, turning your leg out to get the outside line. That's something that you can do. Another thing you can do is if you have a tennis ball. So sometimes the area that gets tight is this area sort of under where the belly of the muscle is. So there's some smaller muscles here. There's a lot of fascia that gets really tight and locked up. So what you can do is you can take a tennis ball and sort of where the larger part of your calf meets the smaller part of your calf, you can put the tennis ball right under there and roll side to side. And that can work out some of the tension in there. Be gentle, of course. So if you like, try that on both legs if you have a tennis ball. And see how that feels. Or keep rolling with your roller or stick. And then let's stand up and do a little calf stretch. You can bend and straighten the front knee to get a little bit deeper. You can bend the back knee if you want to stretch your Achilles tendon. You can shift between the two as you like. And switch legs. And you can switch again, just as much as you need. Calf stretch. And when you've done that, let's go ahead and work on our hamstrings. So remembering from last week that we have the 3 points of the hamstrings, the inner, the middle line, and the outer line. Plus we have the gracilis, which is further in than the inner line, and the IT band, which is directly on the side, outside the outer line. So let's start with our foam roller. on the middle line of the hamstring. Rolling back and forth. Remember, your knee is pointing directly towards the ceiling. You're not turning in or out. And if you don't have a foam roller, you're welcome to use a stick along the back of your hamstring, or you can use your hands, you can pound at it, you can massage it, whatever works. So this is the middle line of the hamstring. And remember, if you need more pressure, you can cross one leg over the other and add a little bit of weight onto your leg. And let's go ahead and turn the leg in slightly and get the inner line of the hamstring. So not all the way in for the gracilis just yet, just a little bit turned in. And let's turn the leg out slightly and focus on the outer line. The outer line has a really big effect on your turnout, as we talked about last week. So even if you roll out your hips and your glutes and you feel like you have a lot of range there, sometimes your hamstrings can get in the way of your range of turnout. So that's why it's really important when we're working on things to unlock more turnout and range, we're also thinking about the hamstrings, especially the outer. And let's go ahead and turn the leg all the way in and roll out the gracilis. And we'll spend a little more time right now focusing on the area closest to the knee as opposed to up by the hip, because we'll do that later when we work on our hips. And when you feel ready, you can switch to your IT band. And remember, if this is too intense for you to lay on the foam roller for your IT band, you are welcome to use the stick on the outside. Same thing with the inside. If your gracilis is really tight, you can use the stick, and that will hurt a little bit less. Focusing on the IT band. And let's go ahead and switch to the other side. So focusing on the middle of the hamstring. Middle of the hamstring. We're probably not going to spend as much time rolling any one muscle group as you would like today. If you're one of those people who likes to roll for a long time, so of course, feel free to experiment with longer rolling time for certain muscle groups, etc. And let's go ahead and turn in slightly, get the inner hamstring. And let's turn out and get the outer hamstring. And when you're ready, turn all the way in and roll out the gracilis. Focusing on the area closer to your knees. And let's go ahead and switch to the IT band. So remember, for gracilis and IT band, you're welcome to use a stick or use your hands to massage if this is too intense for you. And if you have a tennis ball, let's go ahead and do those glute hamstring releases that we did last week. So finding an area where the glute and the hamstring connects, that's tight, and just sitting on the ball on that area and relaxing. Maybe you take a couple of deep breaths there. Maybe 4 to 5. And then when you're ready, find another spot, maybe a little bit closer to the outer hamstring, or maybe a little bit further in, just somewhere that feels really tight. And just breathe. Imagine that muscle just releasing over the tennis ball, melting. And if you find a muscle there where you start feeling the tension, even while you're sitting on the ball, you feel it lower down in the leg, you can roll along that line on the ball, on that muscle, to release it. If you find that that is something that you need. And let's go ahead and switch to the other side. So find an area that feels tight and just relax in that area. And go ahead and switch to another area. And if you like, you can roll back and forth along that area. Feel like you need that. And go ahead and relax. We're going to do a few hamstring stretches before we move into the hip stuff. So we'll just start with a gentle stretch over. This doesn't have to be a really forced stretch, pulling or anything. Just try to relax and get some length in your hamstring. And let's come up. And just one leg, take the opposite hand, cross it over, wrap it around the outside of the foot, and stretch your outer hamstring. And if you like, you can press down above your knee and pull your leg if you want to stretch your hyperextension that way, or you can just keep it down. But remember, if you're going to do that, don't press directly on your kneecap or under it, press above the kneecap. And let's go ahead and switch legs. Opposite arm wraps around the outside. You can use your elbow, push down above your kneecap, use your hand. I like using my elbow. And if you like, you can pull up. And let's go into our downward dog calf and hamstring stretch. So start standing and walk your hands out to where you can keep your heels on the floor. So you're in a downward dog, but don't let your heels pop off the floor. So if that means you're over here or closer, that's fine. But you just want to keep your heels down so you can get that really nice calf stretch. And from here, we're going to curl the back and rock forward slightly. Then we're going to push your heels back down, scoop the back, arch. Push back into your heels, curl your back. Push the heels down, arch. Rock forward a little bit and your heels can come off the ground. Push into your heels, curl, push, arch. Push back, curl, and push forward, arch. Two more, back, curl, forward, arch. And if that ends up being too intense, you can always do bicycles in a arch, bicycles in a curl, and you can also do the one leg switching, so you can do curl and arch with just one leg stretching at a time. Sometimes that's a little bit less intense and feels better. And then maybe you switch legs. Curl and you push and arch forward. Then it's nice to just kind of push your heels into the ground as much as you can. You don't have to be in an arch or a curl, but you just want to push your heels down into the ground, find energy through your heels. And then you can bend your knees and walk your hands back. Find a comfortable place where you can either put your hands on the floor with straight legs, or you can grab your elbows. You can grab the backs of your legs, your ankles, and just give yourself a little gravity stretch. Let gravity do the work. And when you're ready, bend your knees and walk yourself up. Slowly. All right. So now we're going to get into the hip flexors. So hips are really sensitive. So keep in mind that whatever you're doing to roll them out, you want to be very, very careful not to go too hard and bruise the muscles. It can, tighten them up even more. If you over roll them or overdo it, you can end up tearing the muscles slightly, or overstretching it tears the muscles slightly. And then when it rebuilds tighter unless you're consistently stretching and rolling out. So just be aware, hips are sensitive, be careful. Whose hips get tight really, really easily in class? Mine do. Some people, yeah, some people no. For some people, it's really drastic. So for me, it's like, if something is going to get tight in the middle of class, my hips are the first thing to go. Some people who are a lot more open in their hips, they can maintain flexibility throughout class, throughout the day. And if you are one of those people, you are very, very, very lucky, and you want to take care of those hips. If you're less fortunate like me, definitely roll them out before or after class, but be careful with rolling them in the middle of class because, again, they're sensitive. So to find where we're going to start rolling, if you're on your knees or standing up, find your hip bones, and straight down from your hip bones, right here, you're going to feel a muscle. It's kind of a tendon, kind of a muscle sort of feeling, but it attaches into your quads. That area is the hip flexor muscle. And that's what we want to roll out to start with today. This has a really big effect on anything parallel pigeon stretch, or parallel lunge, parallel splits, as opposed to turned out pigeon, which is a different muscle in the inner hip that we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's important to roll out these, but because they're attached to the quads have a really big impact on the hips and vice versa. So if your hips here are tight, what's going to happen is you may find they start creasing, and then you get into an arched back. And this is really not good for your posture when you're dancing if you are stuck in this position all the time. I was for many, many years until I was able to stretch this out and lengthen. And a lot of that has to do with the quads as well. So we are going to think about 3 lines of the quads, but they're a little bit smaller than with the hamstrings. So we have our middle line, our inner line, and our outer line. And they're not really super, super important to think about, like, okay, you know, the outer hamstring attaches to the outer calf, and those have an effect on each other. Pretty much the whole quad affects the whole hip. So start with your stick, if you have one, and just roll along the top, the inner line, and the outer line as you feel you need it. If you don't have that, you can massage with your hands to start. We're going to end up moving to the foam roller a little bit later for the quad, but it's really good to warm it up a little bit before with your hands or a stick, because the foam roller can be pretty intense on your quads, and if you're not used to rolling them out, it can bruise a little bit. Just starting with your hands or with your stick. And you can turn it out a little bit to get the inner line, and turn it in to get the outer line, which does attach to the IT band. So you can kind of get both in one go, your IT band and your outer quad. But usually it's pretty easy to feel where you're tight and where you need work here. Another thing you can do is you can just gently pound with your palms or your fists along the muscle to loosen it up a little bit. We're just going to focus on one hip for right now, because I want you guys to see the difference between your hips when they're rolled and when they're not. So we're going to leave one unrolled for now. So now we are going to transition to the foam roller, and now we're starting to get into our hip flexors as well as the quad. So again, you want to be rolling from your hip bone, where that is the muscle that's straight underneath that. That's what we're trying to roll, is this muscle right here. So go ahead, and if you have your foam roller, roll back and forth along that area. And you can roll in your quad as well if you need, but focus a lot on that hip area. I would not recommend rolling out your hips with a tennis ball ever, because your hips are sensitive, as I've said many times. I do want to emphasize that. And a tennis ball is a small, sort of harder object, as opposed to a foam roller, which is spread out a lot more. So it's a lot more intense. There's a lot more pressure, and you can risk bruising the muscle if you use a tennis ball. So tennis balls are good for calves, good for hamstrings, not for hip flexors. And now I want you guys to turn the leg in, and we're going to stay at the top of the hip area. So this is where our gracilis attaches, starts at the knee, attaches all the way up to the pubic bone. And this area kind of controls your range in your middle splits and developé a la seconde near the hip. So it's really important that this is rolled out. Also, this area, if this is tight in here, your arabesque is going to be turned in and sometimes shorter or lower, because you have to have range in this hip to be able to open it out and lift the leg up. Then the other area that we're going to focus on rolling is if you have pants with pockets, So your hip bones are here, side of your hips are here, sort of the area where you put your hands in your pockets in between that area. There's also a muscle there that can get really tight that controls your turnout. So it's not this hip flexor one that attaches to the quad, it's a little bit out. We're gonna focus on rolling that a little bit also. So it's pretty much straight on top of the roller, but then you turn out just slightly. It's not getting into your glutes just yet. We'll do that a little bit later. But this area is very tight for me. And you'll find also sometimes you want to push with your arms to roll. Sometimes you'll push with your foot for leverage. Whatever ends up working for you. But I realized after I started rolling before classes that I didn't really need to warm up my arms as much because I was doing a lot of rolling and pushing from my arms, and that was actually making my arms stronger. That might happen for you too. Okay, so now we're gonna move off the foam roller, and if you have a tennis ball, what we're gonna do is glute releases. So it's similar to the glute hamstring release where you just find an area that's tight and relax. But this one you'll be laying down. It will be a lot more into the muscle. It might be higher up, might be lower down, but you find an area, you let your leg turn out, and then just relax. And then when you've taken some deep breaths, you start to feel the muscle relax a little bit, then you would move it and find a different spot. And for me, for years, when I would do this, I would not feel it release at all. So I would just leave it there forever, and then I'd end up really sore. So sometimes you won't actually feel the release, but when you feel like it's been enough time, then you move it, and you'll find it actually does help. Another thing you can do if you feel like this isn't working as well, if you feel like you want to move a little bit, is you can roll around on this area. Oops. Sorry, guys. I'll be right back. Keep rolling out, doing the release, whatever. Sorry, my iPad is dying. There you go. Okay. So yeah, another thing you can do, you can roll around gently as long as you're putting some weight in your hands and not just letting all of your weight go, because you could bruise your muscle a little bit. But when you've done one side and you feel like you've gotten a little bit of release there, we'll switch to the other side. So you can either lay down, find an area in your glute that's tight, and just do a release. Or you can sit up and you can roll over that area. And if you don't have a tennis ball, there's unfortunately not really a lot you can do for your glutes unless you have a foam roller, in which case you can sit on your foam roller and roll this way. But I find it doesn't work as well as if you have a tennis ball. Okay, let's wrap up our rolling. And actually, there's one more thing I want to show you guys. So that same muscle on the outside that you can access with the foam roller, you can get with the tennis ball by putting it on the side and just laying on it. And that usually feels really, really good. You can also sit up and roll sideways a little bit if you like on the ball. But I find that just laying on the ball usually gives a pretty good release in that area. So that's something just to play with on your own. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it right now. But this really, really helps with range, I find, in the butterfly stretch. Speaking of which, we're now going to test our range. So we rolled out mainly one hip. So if you guys can feel a difference in your two hips, raise your hand. Yeah, some of you, yeah. For me, I feel a pretty big difference normally. We'll keep testing stretches and see. Apparently your hips are tighter than you thought. Yeah. Yep, that happens for a lot of people. Especially when you start rolling out, you realize like, wow, I have more range in there. For some, usually every person has one hip that's tighter and one hip that's looser naturally. For me, my right is a lot looser naturally than my left. So if I roll out the left, it kind of evens it out. But then when I go to roll off the right will be like way further down. And that's normal. But go ahead and test your glutes. I know we actually ended up rolling out both of our glutes, which we weren't supposed to do, but that's okay. We'll get some extra. And then on the side that you rolled out, test your pigeon turned in as well as turned out. See if you feel any difference. You can also test your lunge. For me, these hip stretches, they don't really feel, I don't feel less tight when I do these stretches. I still feel like there's a lot of pulling and it hurts, but I notice that my range is better. So like I can see in the mirror, or in this case, the Zoom camera, I can see my range is a little bit better than when I first started. And you can turn in. Actually, we stretched this glute, so you want to stretch this way. I feel a lot less of a stretch here when I turn in this way than I did in the beginning. And you can also test your straddle and see if you feel a difference between the two sides of your hips, which one feels like it's looser and can go down further, etc. You may feel a difference, you may not. People who have very open hips probably aren't going to feel as much of a difference, and that's okay. Let's see, is there anything else we needed to test? I think that was it for the testing on that side. Just really quickly, does anybody notice a big difference in any of the stretches specifically, like pigeons, straddle, butterfly, or did anybody notice a difference from specific rolling exercises? You guys can go ahead and type it in the chat box if you did. Forward fold. Laying on your side of the tennis ball. Yeah, that one helps me a lot too. I see some people typing. Yeah, so for some people, things make a big difference, and for some people, not so much. Let's go ahead and do our other side so that we're even. So starting with the quad, rolling out your quad. Getting the middle line, the inside line, and the outer line. And if you don't have a stick, Of course, you can use your hands. And when you've done that, let's go ahead and move to our quad and hip flexor with the foam roller if you have one. So remember, this is directly underneath your hip bone, pretty much parallel to the ground. And you can go into your quad if you feel like it needs it. And let's go ahead and get the inside area of the gracilis, so near the hip. And when you've rolled that out for a little bit, let's move to the outer area of the hip, not quite on the side, but a little more towards the side than you were with the regular hip flexor roll. Actually, I just realized the sun is probably making it really hard for you guys to see what's going on. Just moving over here. Okay. Yeah. So we're doing kind of the side in here. And when you've done that, we'll go ahead and move to glutes with the tennis ball. So again, either you can lay down or you can sit up and just roll out that area. We've done this already, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. Theoretically, we did both hips. And let's test our range in all of our stretches again. So butterfly, you may notice that you have one leg that's better than the other. For me, since my left hip is worse and we just rolled out the right one, this now goes a lot further than it used to. And you can test your range in pigeon both sides and compare, see if they've evened out. Actually gonna move this. So you can do pigeon turned in and turned out. See how that feels. You can stretch in the lunge with your knee off the floor, knee on the floor. One thing I forgot we could have done was we could have tested the range of our quads leaning back beforehand, as opposed to now. So that's something you can play with at home. If you did your splits, you can test your splits. You can test straddle and see if now that's made a difference. You can lean forward For me, I feel a huge difference now that I've rolled out both sides. All very personal. So go ahead and finish up testing your stretches. Does anybody notice a big difference from what we've done? Some people, yeah. Some people notice a small difference. Who else says yes, big difference? Me too. So what we're gonna do now is some deeper hip stretches to get into the psoas muscle. So psoas muscle, the only way you can really access it to roll out is with a tennis ball, and it's getting like in towards the hips, sort of into your belly area. And that area is just really sensitive, really difficult to roll out without hurting yourself. So I don't like to do it. That one is better to, like, if you have a massage therapist or PT, you can see if you're having trouble with your psoas. It's better to have them massage it and work it out than to try to do it yourself. But there is a really good stretch that's gentle and accesses that area very, very well. And that is with a foam roller or a yoga block or something propping up your hips. So you can also do this without something under your hips, but if you have a normal range, if you're pretty flexible like most dancers, even if you're a tight dancer like me, you're gonna need something under your hips. So you wanna put it right under your tailbone and then extend one leg out completely parallel. You don't wanna let it turn out because then you're getting into a different part of your hip. You're not getting the really lengthened stretch through your psoas and your hip flexor. So you want it completely parallel. It's better to flex your foot so you have energy pushing away. It's an active stretch. It's not a relaxed stretch. Then you take your other leg and you pull it in towards yourself. So there's opposition. You're reaching one leg away from the other. And you're sort of pushing and pulling at the same time. And that gives you a stretch, really good stretch through the front of your body. And this is really, really helpful if you have tight quads, tight hips, and you find your hips creasing in class to the point where you can't lengthen in the front. This is really helpful for that and will really help your lower body posture in class. And it is work. It is work to keep your leg parallel, because if we just relax, our foot wants to turn out. So as much as you can, try to keep it completely parallel. This works even better if you have a friend or somebody who can push your leg inwards, not totally in, but keep it parallel and then pull it away from you. And go ahead and try the other leg. So not letting it turn out, keeping it parallel, pushing it away from you, and pulling the other leg into you. Another thing you want to make sure you're not doing is collapsing in your upper back up here. There is an arch. You don't want it to be a forced arch up here, but you also want to make sure you're not collapsing, because then this is not getting as good of a stretch. There's reach away through your leg. And if you don't have a foam roller or a yoga block, you could try this with a pile of books even. Just something, a pillow, something under your sacrum so that you get that stretch. Another good thing to do to open up the front of the hips is, if they're really, really tight, is just lay like this. And you don't have to think about being parallel, but this kind of opens up the whole front body area. And I like to do this before class. I'll just lay on a foam roller for maybe like 2 minutes and kind of let everything open up before I start rolling and stretching. And coming up, there's one more stretch before we go that I want to show you guys that's really helpful for increasing range in straddle position, so, or middle splits. So this is not so much about like how far down you can go, but how wide your legs can go actually. And this is one that if you've taken class from Miss Ralston and she's given you floor bar, she loves to do this in floor bar. But I'm showing a slightly modified version that actually helps you get into your range a little bit better. So it's the second position stretch. It usually hurts a lot. You flex your feet. So it's kind of like you're in a second position plie, except you're putting that onto the floor. And what I like to do is rock forward on my arms and then push back and shift my feet to one side. So I'm getting a stretch in this side. Then I rock forward and I shift to the other side. So now I'm getting a stretch here. So it's you're gently rocking back and forth, and you're getting a little bit more range to each side one at a time. You can also do this both legs at once, but it's pretty intense. So I like to be a little bit more gentle when I'm stretching, and because there's movement in the stretch, it's not super static. It doesn't hurt as much. You can do this before class and still feel like you're not fatigued in your muscles. And then another good one to do if you are going to hold a static stretch is to do half of that. So you have your one leg out here. I'm actually going to do this leg here in second position, and then your other leg is out to the side. So this leg is still flexed. You can see up here it's in second position, and you can flex, you can point, but you're kind of getting both stretches at the same time. You're getting one hip turned in and you're getting one gracilis stretch. I don't know why this is a good stretch, but it's a really good stretch. I find it helps a lot before class. And then you can try it to the other side also. Flex one foot, the other one is turned out. And this one, if you have enough range, you can sit down. Sometimes you'll have more range on one side than the other. And that's it. Those are some really gentle, easy hip stretches that can help increase your range. So does anybody have any questions specifically about hips, accessing turnout, what to do in situations? You guys can unmute yourselves if you want to ask a question at this time. Or you can type in the chat box if you have a question. And if you don't have any questions, then we'll call it a day. So I'll stick around for a couple more minutes if you guys do have questions, but if not, thank you very much. I will see you next week. Get some rest. Hopefully this helps. If it doesn't, you can pass this on to somebody and maybe it will help. And I will see you next week. Next week, we'll do back and shoulders. Thank you guys.
Bye.
Thank you.